Approval of Tapestry Public Charter School Incorporated.
Dr. Johnson, members of the board, and Mr. Chairman, Tapestry Public Charter School will be the 10th startup charter school in the DeKalb County School District if approved. Tapestry will offer an exclusive, individualized learning environment that is academically engaging both for traditional students and those on the autism spectrum. If approved, the school will serve all selected traditional, gifted, ELL, and special education students in grades 6 through 8 who live in the various communities in the DeKalb County School District. The charter school petitioner plans to expand the program to serve grades 6 through 12 during the approved charter term of 5 school years. Each grade level will consist of 32 students. The charter school curriculum is designed to allow all children to thrive, but will particularly engage students diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder who may not reach their potential in traditional middle and high school environments. Students attending the charter school may have needs such as minor speech disabilities, communication development disorders, academic learning disabilities, attention deficit, inability to socialize with peers, emotional and behavior disorders, sensory disorders, and/or fine and gross motor disorders. The school's proposed location is Northeast Baptist Church, located on 4046 Shamley Tucker Road in Atlanta, Georgia. Parents will transport their children to and from school each day. The church's education hall, where the proposed charter will be housed, is connected to a large front and back parking lots capable of supporting 300 or more parents entering and exiting the school in a timely manner without negatively affecting the surrounding neighborhoods. The petitioners have held meetings on site to provide the opportunity for community involvement and to make the community aware of the intent to implement a startup charter school beginning July 2014. It is requested that the Board of Education approve the charter petition for the Tapestry Public Charter School, Inc. for the proposed 5-year charter term.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Let's start with Mr. Mayfield.
Yeah, I know I have at least 4, so I'm hoping you're very patient with me. I guess it looks like one of the key characteristics of this school is the fact that it will be serving autistic children.
It is, yes.
Right. And so my question is, will this just be exclusively autistic children and their siblings, assuming that many of their siblings probably won't be or may not be, or do we have a sense of, what percentage of the autistic students in DeKalb do we think will make up that school? Or vice versa, actually, what percentage of the school will actually be made up of autistic children?
We're looking at, the petition is projecting 50% of the school will be made up of autistic students.
Okay. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I'm sorry, and they're going to be using the inclusion model, similar to the way CORE would use it with the early childhood students.
Okay. So 50% would be the minimum number of autistic children. And how does that number compare with our demand, the demand on the DeKalb school system for these students? In other words, what impact will it have in absorbing the additional demand that we may not be serving right now? Or where are these students right now?
What we've done, and I'm going to ask Pat Copeland to kind of come in with me on this, what we've done is we've gotten a list of all the numbers of all the autistic students in DeKalb County from grades 6 through 12. And what we've done is we've looked at those numbers to see approximately how many students will be taken from those numbers that would go into this school if it's approved. And Pat, can you bring me any additional insights on this?
Yes. Okay. We've taken a look at the number of autistic students throughout grade levels 6 through 12, and we found that we have at least 404 students. And the number of students, of course, would range from 31 students per grade level to 78 students. So Tapestry could potentially support all the students per grade level. So 50%, 100% of these students could actually be served at this local school.
Right, which begs my next question, and that is that I would assume that, one of the prime reasons for approving this would be that they would be expected, Tapestry would be expected to improve the academic performance of those students. And so what level of commitment are they making compared to what we're doing with those students now?
Yeah, they have, in their petition, they have committed to 3% each
3%
year
improvement.
of academic improvement with those students.
And finally, have they provided any evidence on their ability to be successful at doing that?
Pat, you want to answer that question?
They are,
Yeah.
this is the first time that they've actually been involved in providing educational opportunities for the students. Some of the staff members that will serve through Tapestry are staff members who have taught autistic students. Most of them are parents with autistic children. They've researched many of the resources that they're planning to implement that would really better serve the students. They're looking at low ratios for the students. The class size is 16, having an 8-to-1 student-teacher ratio. They've looked at all of the sensory environments that will be implemented for the students here. So that they're looking at some strategies that would certainly support the instructional needs of the students.
So the school hasn't demonstrated success, and have the instructors or the staff, have they any of them bring a track record of success?
Uh,
We currently do not have any evidence in their petition to support that.
Okay, all right.
They're also looking at multi-age groups in their, in their petition too.
Okay.
And
Dr. Morley?
Yes, I had several questions as an educator. I looked at the word all when they're talking about eligible students, all, and then you have grades 6, 7, and 8, and 32 students. And then when we look at the mission, and you're talking about the neurotypical students and the autistic students, my concern is how do we say as a startup charter that the system is going to be responsible for making sure that Tapestry does not go over the numbers that it's saying and trying to fulfill one or the other. So if we're looking at either they're going to serve one population or other, but I have a real concern that they're trying to not only serve, as they said, regular students, they're trying to serve students who are at a higher level, but they're also taking those students who have neurological type issues and autistic students, and they're trying to serve them at the same time. So what guarantee do we have that there's going to be a balance, or that they can actually actively service all of these students? Because we're talking about taking and housing all in one place, and we as a system, we're always facing that dilemma of trying to make sure that we do the best education and that in the least restrictive environment for all students. So what guarantee does Tapestry have as a startup to say that they're going to be able to meet the needs of all these students?
if you look at the first year they're only going to have 96 students. I think they're 6th through 8th graders the first year. And what happens is, let's say if more students apply more than the 96 students, we usually divide that 50% will be on the autism spectrum, and then 50% would be traditional. And then it usually starts, we would probably have a lottery, or that's what we've done in the past with the charter schools, if they go over the 96 numbers on that first year.
So that leads to my next question, if they go over, because it seems to me as if some of the other charter schools have been able to increase their enrollment and have additional students, and then we're expected to pay for those additional students. Even though they're contracting for one amount, they are actually raising the levels of those amounts. So what guarantee do we have that we're not going to be stuck if they decide that even though they have a lottery, there are 96 students, but they come up with 150 students? So where are we with that and being able to make a decision to actually hold them to what they agreed to, and not having to be responsible for providing the finances for that?
Okay, Mr. Thurman.
Dr. Morley, you bring up, I think, a significant point. I have met with Dr. Bell and Attorney Ramsey, and going forward, by the way, there has been a history of mission creep, so to speak, as it relates to our charter partners in DeKalb County. But that, going forward, all new charters will have to sign and agree to a specific contract that will limit that from occurring. That has not been, frankly, the practice or the position of the DeKalb School District up until this point. Mr. Ramsey or either Dr. Bell might want to speak to that. It's a concern that we've had, and I believe it's a concern that we are addressing. Is that right, Mr. Ramsey?
That's correct, Mr. Thurman, members of the board. We've had some conversations with the state and Sutherland regarding this matter. Heretofore, prior to about 3 years ago, whatever petition the local Board of Education approved, that's basically what was included in the charter. The state has made some changes to that process occurring about 3 years ago, and now it's incumbent upon each school district to negotiate those kinds of items into the charter agreement, such as enrollment, so that we can be ensured what our enrollment will be.
One more question.
Go right ahead.
The other question and concern I have is the viability and the ability of the staff to be able to meet the educational and academic needs of these students. We're talking about autism, we're talking about neurological, making sure that they have the actual training, they have the actual preparation, that they have the experience behind them to be able to do what we said we're going to do as a system, and that we still have responsibility for it. And it concerns me that we're not for sure as to where the staff is, how much training, how much say-so do we have as a system to mandate, dictate from human resources or wherever to say that these educators are going to be actually trained, they're going to be prepared, that they will have continuing education. And I think that's something that we have to make sure, because we're talking about a special needs population, and we want to make sure we get it right. We don't want to play games. We can't play games with any children. All of them have needs, but most certainly when you're talking about a special needs population, and because we're talking about a mixed population, almost like a Montessori type setup, that we have the staff that are there, not only the staff, the administration who has some wherewithal and have some knowledge about this type of population. What guarantee do we have to make sure that the people who are coming in that can actually meet the needs of these students and be able to meet the needs of the school to say that they're going to do what they say that they do, that the outcome actually meets the needs of what is actually taking place in the school?
Let me answer directly your question, and then I'll allow Dr. Thompson and Ms. Copeland to provide some detail regarding their due diligence. But to your question, we have no guarantee. It can't be guaranteed, particularly when you have startup charters, and we can negotiate, we can discuss, we can do due diligence. But to your point, and I will answer you very frankly, is that there are no guarantees that the promises that are being made can actually be fulfilled. It's just not.
But if we have HR who's going to make sure we have a process of credentialing and making sure, and Dr. Ward Smith making sure that everybody who comes into this system is actually certified, that they have experience, they go through a process, protocol, and procedures to make sure everything is in place. Do we have that option to be able to make sure that the people coming into the startup school actually will go through a process, protocol, and procedures to make sure that they actually meet the needs of what's expected of them as would be in any other school?
Dr. Morley, that is actually a concern for all charter schools. Please note that the state does allow charter systems, charter schools to waive certification requirements. With public school districts, we are required by NCLB to ensure that all teachers are content certified, or to provide a timeline for them to become content certified through the appropriate pedagogy. However, I do believe in Tapestry, as well as several of the other startup charters, certification is something that is waived, and per charter governance laws, that is whereby teachers can be selected based upon experience as opposed to background education and certification. But please note that that is a concern not just for Tapestry, but for all startup charters, as the state does allow them to waive that.
So and this goes back to, I was with Teach of America. I was the first support director for Teach of America in the state of Georgia, and I always had the concern is that we hold certain of our educators to one standard, and then we can have waivers for others. Is there not anything that the system can do, or is there ever a challenge with the state to begin to look at all of this? So do we begin to sort of allow people to come in at different levels? Where the other educators who have to meet certain standards in order to be able to access and be able to be viable in the system, but that we can waive others? Is there any challenge or not a challenge at any particular time about this situation?
Well, questions are being raised, such as you're challenging it right now, I think, Dr. Martin. And that's what Dr. Ward Smith and Dr. Thompson and Ms. Copeland and anyone involved in public education knows. And I don't want to be redundant, but these are promises and we really won't know whether or not anyone can deliver what he or she is promising until at some point in the future when we can conduct a fair and honest evaluation. Anyone who comes forward and makes the statement about what they will accomplish is just not true.
And
they don't have the basis for it.
Yeah, that concerns me. And let me ask the question, out of the charter schools that we have now, how many of them are actually meeting the milestones that we would actually say are successful at this particular time?
I will refer this to Ms. Copeland. Pat, since you work with them.
I would say approximately 50% of the charter schools.
And to your point, charter schools are not a magic bullet.
Right.
Just because it's a charter doesn't necessarily mean you're going to generate higher performance, either academically or from a career readiness perspective.
And I agree, and I think one of the concerns that I have is that, and I know where the state is leaning and going towards, but at some particular time is that if we can set up a different system over here, what is it that keeps us from having certain variables in place within our system that we already have to make sure that education is at a level of success? And so I do have many, many questions, and I do have many concerns. I know there's no guarantee about anything. As an educator, I always say to my students, I can't guarantee what will happen if you don't study, if you don't actually commit to what's going on. But I think at some particular time as taxpayers, and I am a taxpayer in DeKalb County, to be able to question as to where we're going, and if we don't have guarantees and if we don't have anything, because we're held to certain standards as a public schools, but then we can allow and sit back that charters are not held to that same standard. So what does it say about a taxpayer, but what does it also say about educators that we're allowed to have this money constantly siphoned from one place to fit the needs? And I was reading an email from a parent, and her words sort of concerned me, and the words were that she looked at charters allowing them to have autonomy and independence. And that's okay to have autonomy and independence, but we have autonomy and independence and you're going on your own. What does that say about the rest of us who have to adhere to certain standards? And how much autonomy do we give? How much independence do we give? When do we begin to say that there's certain standards that have to be held to? If we're talking about going in a way, and we keep, as an educator for over 20-something years, getting on these different bandwagons that don't really show any really guarantee, and nothing in life is guaranteed, but at least some standards that our educational systems are getting better really, really concerns me.
Mr. Coleman.
As everyone so far, I have a few separate questions. One was just making sure that I understand the admissions and lottery process properly. So I understand this is a mix of neurotypical students and students on the autism spectrum, and I understand it's capped at 96 students in the first year.
Yes.
What I didn't understand was whether, and maybe I just missed this in the application packet, whether that was 96 irrespective of whether they were neurotypical or on the autism spectrum, or whether there was a reserved number of seats for instance.
96 total, period.
And so there's no separate lottery process for neurotypical and autistic students. Is that correct?
We don't do that, no.
And I guess the underlying concern, obviously, is this school is dedicated to serve, primarily separated off to serve students on the autism spectrum. I understand the importance of having a mix of students in the school. What I guess gave me a little pause about that was making sure that we are primarily serving that population, that it's fit for purpose for that. And if there's no differentiation in the lottery, I was wondering how we could assure that we're primarily serving the needs of those autistic students, if that makes sense. Second couple of questions just about the cost to families and students. So I understood earlier that transportation would essentially be covered by the parents because of the dispersed nature of the student population. I also noticed in the application that they're setting up essentially a catering service rather than a traditional dining service because of some of the sensory needs of the students in the schools. What are the financial impacts of that to the students or their families? I mean, is this something where the catering will essentially just be, it will be completely covered by the school system? Does that have to be subsidized by families in some way? And are the costs of that catering service going to be in line with the costs of what we have in most of the other schools?
It's not covered by
I do believe the petitioners are planning to ensure that they are in line with our current lunch cost and services.
Got it. So there would be no charge to students or families for additional charge above and beyond the cost covered by the schools. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Sorry, I know some of these are specific, but I want to make sure I understand it properly. I noticed that one of the only changes to the academics requirements that was stated here, at least, was the drop of a social studies requirement, if I read that correctly. I think there's one fewer social studies credit requirement.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, in PAC, I think we're doing 23 units instead of 24 units, and they are dropping the social studies component in there.
And what was the rationale behind that? Was there a replacement unit somewhere, or was it because of the structure of the longer classes that got squeezed out?
Did they say when you met with them, Pat, that
They did not. They are simply following the basic state graduation requirements rather than the DeKalb County School District requirements.
Okay, got it. Okay. And then this is a much broader question. I know I got very specific with those. What is I look at this, it's a reasonably small school, at least in the beginning. And so one of the questions I have is with the administrative overhead associated with that, obviously, and with the teacher-to-student ratio, which may be perfectly justified, especially in serving students on the autism spectrum. What do we expect to be the financial impact of this? Just on a, if I think about a cost per student basis, for instance, how will that compare to the cost per student that we have in the rest of the county right now?
and the student-teacher ratio right now is 16-2 is with this charter school. Because of the autistic kids that are in that class is why they make it 16-2. Now, the financial impact on that, Dr. Bell, would you like to address that? As far as the financial impact on?
We haven't done any exact numbers, but that's about roughly half the number of students per teacher as we carry in the rest of the system.
And then plus, Dr. Howell just reminded me about special ed that the FTE carries a different weight on special ed students, and so this would not be such a big impact as we're thinking it would be because of the weight.
It depends on the particular exceptionality, so it's difficult to calculate without knowing exactly the makeup because special needs isn't just one flat, it's by the exceptionality.
What if I know, and I know the answer to this is it's not, it differs by exceptionality. What would be a standard student-to-teacher ratio, for instance? I'm assuming students on the autistic spectrum that's treated as a reasonably intensive need in our special education community, or maybe you could answer that for me. What would be a typical kind of teacher-to-student ratio for people with intensive special education needs, such as this?
Well, again, that's going to be IEP driven, depending on if you can have a co-taught class, if it needs to be pull out, and again, depending on what the particular exceptionality is. I'm pulling up, or I could reference you to, we bring the class size agenda to the board, and so this was in July, and there's a chart, and it details the particular, here for the 13-14, right here. So, it has SPED on there as well, where it should be a whole separate sheet. And pull up. We have a whole separate sheet. I pulled up the wrong one. We'd be happy to share that with, We're happy to share this document, or you can access it through e-boards from the July meeting. The speech language is funded at 10. It's a maximum with no para at 13, maximum with para at 17. Your mild intellectual disability is funded at 8.5, with the maximum with no para at 12, with the para at 15. You can get to visual impairment, deaf, hard of hearing, orthopedic impairment. Those are funded at 5. They're capped at 5 without a para, with a para 6. So it ranges from on the low end of the exceptionalities to 5 to the high end of class sizes of 14, 10 to 14. And that's funding. As far as maximum class size with para, it could be as large as 17 or 18, depending on the exceptionality.
Mr. Orson?
Got a number of comments. There may be even a question or two in here. And I guess the overarching question is, these are middle school kids who are generally in our traditional middle schools. And these are kids who we are trying to accommodate and provide services to, often in a setting that really isn't optimized. We don't, at the elementary school level and younger, we have Coralwood, we have Hawthorne, we have other facilities that meet the needs of these kids. And the unfortunate aspect of special education is that after 5th grade, we're often ill-equipped, and our facilities are ill-equipped, and our staffing is ill-equipped to optimize the needs. Would that be a fair assessment of not just us, it's every school system? And so, and I've had the opportunity to meet a number of the organizers of this charter over the past year who are very passionate, who have spent a lot of time researching the issue. Some have very strong firsthand knowledge. Some have been involved in entities like the Fraser Center, which is a private institution providing these kind of services for younger children. Coralwood, I mean, they have a wealth of experience and knowledge, and I think they come to this charter and this concept very much motivated by trying to provide an environment where these kids can succeed. To the superintendent's point, which is true of any charter, there are no guarantees. To know whether they will succeed, we can only know once they start. That's true in every charter school. It's true in every school we start. I think we need to be careful to assume that there's some benchmark for charter schools that's different than our traditional schools. We have very successful traditional schools, and unfortunately in our system and others, we have very unsuccessful, failing schools by every independent analysis. And it's incumbent upon us, I think, to try to find every opportunity to optimize success. The charter movement, which is no panacea, no silver bullet, and I completely agree, arose because we weren't successful in every instance. And the opportunity to incubate new ideas, to create new environments, to create an environment in which, and that's where I think people get caught up in these ideas of waivers without actually fully appreciating what they're intended to do, which is about flexibility. As a system, we're bound by a set of rules, us and every other system, some of which are created by our own legislative decision-making, some by the state, some by the federal government. And charter movement and charter schools, in large part, were designed to create environments in which there could be waivers of some of those rules with the concept of success. Now, when we talk about guarantees of success, we can't guarantee success, but there's a contractual requirement for success. Is that not correct? The 3% year-to-year improvement. I mean, that, to me, is the indicator. And the failure of the charter petitioners to meet those benchmarks, here or in any other petition, gives the Board of Education, the school district, ultimate authority because we can revoke the charter. Is that not correct? Right. I mean, the whole nature of the charter movement is not that it essentially creates independent schools, but it creates opportunities for environments in which there is autonomy and some independence, but the ultimate responsibility by the contract is outlined in the charter that they sign with the Board of Education. And I think that's an important part for us to remember, because the ultimate authority still resides in the board, and what we are doing is, in a number of instances, and which we have already done, we have asked others to serve as the primary mover to see if we can be successful. And to Ms. Copeland, to your point, we will accept 50% for lack of because it's not worth having a longer discussion. Some are successful, some are not. And it's incumbent upon us, for those schools, if there are schools that are not, then to either not renew or to revoke the charter. Would that be a correct assessment of how charters are supposed to work here and everywhere else? And I appreciate, that we have a obligation as a fiduciary for the school system, but also as a inferior unit of the state of Georgia, to recognize that the state has embraced charters as one alternative within the delivery of educational services. and we have embraced it. I mean, the fact of the matter is we have a number of charters. You know, we don't have the largest number of charters, but we have a decent number of charters, and so I think there is a history in our system of recognizing that charters are a viable part of the delivery of educational services, and that they can serve missions or in ways that we might not be able to do as a large system because they have flexibility that's built in to their charter. When I look at some of the waivers, I know one of the questions was about HR, and one of the primary movers for charters is the ability to have control over the hiring practices in their school in order, to optimize, again, the staff that they hire against the population they're serving. And I think one of the debates, and is this fair, that we often hear is, are they hiring highly qualified teachers? I've heard that somewhere along the dais here. But I know that part of the debate is the debate between highly qualified and highly experienced. And that's something that has been lost in the educational jargon at times, that we have had such an emphasis on qualifications. You get a degree, you get a certification. It doesn't necessarily, and that's one of the struggles we're having in terms of creating assessment tools at the teaching level, is to make a distinction between qualifications and experience, because ultimately you want a highly effective teacher, right? That's really the benchmark that we're seeking. And that the charter petitioners, as I read the charter, that's what they're seeking, not only in their hiring practices, but also in their professional development plans, to have a very inclusive, ongoing, regular, routine part of professional development to ensure, I would hope, that their staff is meeting the needs and are highly effective in the delivery of services. One of the things I noted in the charter, and you can answer, is that they place a great emphasis on finding partners for the school. Not partners like, will Kroger give us 10 cents every time you shop at the store, but partners who are active participants in the school and who bring an array of either services or experiences that, again, meet the needs of the students. Would that be a fair assessment of your review of the charter?
Yes, from their petition, yes.
Okay, and it seems to me that they've done a lot of work in that area, which I think is quite impressive. I also heard the question, which I think is a great question, is one we struggle with because there's an overarching legal issue about how do the lottery and how it works, and how, if you end up with a lottery, the distribution of those seats of children who are on the spectrum and children who are neurotypical. And the problem with that is you try to get to 50-50. There are some questions under the law as to whether you could actually force a 50-50 outcome. And I think that's one. Would that not be correct, Mr. Ramsey, that there are some questions under federal law that as to whether you could ensure that there was a 50-50 outcome because of federal rules that apply?
I apologize, Mr. Orson, if you'll repeat the question.
Yeah, there's always the kid in the back. That was like me in the back of the class. It's called on by the professor. That one of the challenges of ensuring a 50-50 distribution by a lottery is that there are some federal laws that might limit us in guaranteeing a 50-50 distribution, and that is just, it is what it is. I mean, I know that the schools, for example, that have high refugee or immigrant populations are serving that, attempt to get to that level, but you can't always ensure a complete 50-50 distribution because of the legal restrictions on it.
You're right, it is a goal.
Okay, it's a goal, and I think it's a laudable goal, and I think it's, encapsulated within the confines of the charter, which is that they are, at the end, to me, what impresses me is that their desire to serve a population that I think, without argument, is being underserved because we are not equipped to serve that population, particularly after they get out of the elementary school environment. And I think we, as a board and as a school system, should be embracing opportunities to pursue innovation, to pursue new approaches. I don't think that they result in the undermining of the school system. I think they strengthen us if we are willing to be a leader in embracing these ideas, because at the end of the day, if we approve this, they are a DeKalb County charter school. They're not an independent charter school outside of the purview of the DeKalb County school system. They're not a independent charter school that has been created by and approved by the state, so they are even further, completely beyond our purview. They're something that we would be embracing as a school that we think offers an alternative to a segment of our population that we may not be doing quite the job we should be doing as a school system. So with all that said, I think it's probably easy to discern where I stand on the application. But I also think it's important to appreciate why this is such a worthwhile endeavor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orson. One question I would want to raise, as when we approve any charter school, naturally the purpose of approving a charter school would be one that shows some exception to the way we deliver the instructional program to our students. So my question is, have you identified any instructional strategies in this petition that would be different than what we're already doing?
And Pat, you want to talk about the instructional strategies we talked about earlier today?
Dr. Johnson, that's a very good question, because I think that our current middle and high schools work very hard to ensure a quality education for all of our students. The one component that I see them utilizing probably more so than you would in a traditional classroom is technology. So that one piece, the way the technology will be infused into their program, is just the one thing that sets them apart, and the reduced class sizes.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman, was it Mr. Coleman first? Mr. Coleman, and then Mr. Mayfield.
Sorry, I have one point of information maybe for us about just the charter school approval process, and then one follow-up question based on Mr. Orson's comments. So I didn't realize there was a federal limitation, for instance, on targeting percentages of certain populations. And maybe this is a clarification you can answer now, maybe it's not. Are there, within the bounds of the law, could we set any targets or any quotas for the number of autistic students? And so I won't make it a hypothetical. In this school, is it even legally possible to set quotas at some level, maybe not 50-50, maybe at a different level? Because one of the ways I'll judge the success of this school, if it's 98% neurotypical, I think it hasn't succeeded, right? And I don't know exactly what the balance is. I know the educators who have investigated this know that much better than I do in terms of the proper balance of neurotypical and autistic students. But, I think the purpose here is to serve the autistic community better than we do now. And so my question is it legally possible to set a quota at any level, even if it's not 50-50 in a school like this?
The state seeks to foster this alternative education with the individuals who are experts, but the state sets the mandates as to what they think are permissible. And I'm not sure if I understand exactly what you're saying. You want to know whether it's federally mandated.
I think my question is really, could we write into the charter if we wanted to, if the educators involved so thought that, a certain percentage, if more than 40, since it's a 96-person class, students on the autistic spectrum apply for admission, that those 40 get preference without going into lottery, irrespective of the number of other students. Does that make sense, that we mandate that a certain number of seats are reserved for students on the autistic spectrum?
I see your point, but that's not a decision that the district gets to make alone. The state does have significant say in that process. So I think we would not be able to answer that question for you today.
We have do you have a response to that question?
I think that I can actually speak to that question. Having been involved with international community.
I'm sorry. I thought she was.
She can't speak.
She's not a
She's not a staff. She's not a staff.
Okay.
I know maybe we can't answer that now. I would love to know a response to that, if possible, as soon as possible, because to me, that is a primary thing that will make this successful if it's serving the population it was designed to serve. And I get increasingly uncomfortable, with the concept if it doesn't, because if we had 1,000 students apply across the system, and on average, I think you said we had something like 400 autistic students. I mean, that is, out of 1,000 students applying, that would mean we would end up with a very small number of, well, actually, that would be higher. That would be about right. Yeah, never mind. So maybe it would work out with general population. I just want to make sure we're serving the community that we set out. No, I'm sorry, that wouldn't work out right in terms of the numbers. We'd get like 5 or 6. Yes, I completely agree. I'd just love if we could specify that at the outset. The second question I have is I know we have a chance to follow up and offer feedback on changes to the proposed charter throughout the chartering process. Once it gets to this point in the process, how can we make changes to the charter if we so choose? And this is a point of information. So I know we have a chance to offer feedback in the lead up to the proposal. At this point in the process, if we wanted to ask for a change in the charter, what are our options?
This is what we've learned as of late, Mr. Coleman. The board can painstakingly go through this process, and as I said earlier, heretofore, the state would adopt the petition that was approved by the local board of education. Now, the charter division of the state has reduced the charter agreement itself to a document that's only about 4 or 5 pages long, depending. And so, therefore, the district, although is named in the charter itself, the district is not signatory to the charter, and that is something that apparently has not been challenged in the past, and that's what we've had under discussion with the superintendent to ensure that the school district is able to enforce the terms of the charter going forward and to incorporate essential contractual items into the charter going forward.
I guess my question was slightly differently, I think. I'm not sure if I understood your response, so you may have answered and I may just not have understood. If we wanted to change, and I'll give you a concrete example rather than a hypothetical, all this is not a proposal. If we wanted to ask, based on the answer to that legal question, that they set what they think is an appropriate number of reserved seats for students on the autistic spectrum, and we were to propose that that be a part of this formal charter, I understand that we can offer feedback on the charter and I think resubmissions in the process leading up to this day where we vote on the charter. What are our options to ask them to make a specific change to that charter now, on this day as we're voting?
Today, prior to?
Today. So in this concrete example, if I had a problem with this
Ms.
charter...
Copeland, I believe you said you can answer that question.
Yes.
We could say to the petitioner, pending board approval, clarifications or revisions are mandated before moving forward with it.
And so we would vote on that today with our contingencies incorporated, or we would send that back to the petitioner and then vote on it at a later date. I'm sorry to be so, maybe I'm the only person who wants to understand the specifics.
John, from my experiences with the charter petitions, as well as the process, I think you are correct from the standpoint that any changes the board desired to make, they could make recommendations that they would approve it contingent upon the changes that whichever changes the board is requesting, and that at the appropriate time that will be sent back to the committee. Normally, in situations like this, you have the committee here to respond to any questions that they may have from that standpoint, but that's my understanding of the procedure.
I'd like to comment a little further and maybe clarify a little bit further about what Mr. Ramsey was saying. The way the process works is once the charter is approved, or if it's approved, then the next step in the process is we submit the charter to the State Department, and then they, like Mr. Ramsey was saying, have this separate document that they create as sort of a template that they are using across the state for how they enforce charter agreements that the district would sign, the charter school would sign, and the state would sign. We have gone back to them and have said, wait a minute, we had some concerns with there was a couple of prior charter schools before the current board was in place, that we went back to the state on that and said, we have some issues here because there are certain things in this charter that we need to be part of this agreement that you're having a three-way, deal being done. And it's really a negotiation. They're willing to take some of it, but then they push back on other things. So in your hypothetical, and I don't know the answer to your question of whether or not we can set aside a quota of 40 or what, we can certainly look into that and get back to you. But at a minimum, in order to enforce something like that, we would have to go to the state and say, we want that to be part of the contract. And I don't know what the state would say. So we would just have to negotiate with it. It wouldn't be binding. I mean, once that contract is finalized, it would come back to you as a board to have a second chance to vote whether to approve that contract or not. And if there weren't provisions in there that made you feel comfortable enough, including the one that we got earlier about the enrollment, what happens if enrollment skyrockets? Well, we've tried to put in a provision that limits that, as Mr. Ramsey was alluding to. So,
but what if the petitioners agree to that change prior to board approval and sending to the state?
Well, I think that would be probably the first step you would need to get, make sure they're okay with it.
That was the point I was making.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
You make the changes here prior to board approval or contingent upon board approval. These items are changed.
I agree with that, but that's step one, to approve the charter. There's still a whole other step that we've got to go through.
But that's going to the state.
Correct.
But it has to be dealt with here first. Yes. Yes. Sure.
So there was a legal issue, which is whatever conditions we might put on can't in and of themselves be extra legal, or we create a situation in which the charter itself would fail. So, and I only say this, and I'll ask for a point of personal privilege, that I believe the charter petitioners would have included that provision in this petition if they legally thought they could do so, because they are clearly motivated to serve that population. This is not some effort to serve just a large group of neurotypical students within the companies. I do not believe they thought they could legally do so, and therefore if we add a condition that makes them extra illegal, we will doom the charter even if we intend to support it.
We have Dr. Morley and Mr. Mayfield.
I think that we have to be realistic about the fact that sometimes people just don't know. And we have a responsibility to educate them about the things that could be and the possibility as they're coming about. We all have a dream of what we'd like to see take place with education, but it might not be that they thought there were legalities that they would have to come up against. It could also be the fact that they might not have known that these are some of the conditions that need to take place. And I think that we have a responsibility to be able to say, if you're looking at getting this forward, then these things need to take place. But the other concern, back to what Dr. Johnson's question was, what is it that this school is going to offer that we're not already offering or that we cannot offer, and what is it that keeps us from being able to offer what's supposed to be offered to be able to meet the needs of these students, especially when we're getting federal monies and we're getting grants, we're getting all these things that are there. And so I think it comes down to that. How can we take and set aside and say that this school is going to offer something so different, so drastically different, so after a while, then would there be a need for all the others, that we can have others coming up and saying that they're going to meet these needs? Why can't we meet those needs? What is it that keeps us from being able to meet those needs?
Mr. Mayfield?
Yeah, just a couple of questions, maybe a comment, and then a possible motion. The questions are, in terms of process, this is the first time I've seen the petition, and so I guess I come with a presumption, and I need to be corrected here, that we have 30 days to deliberate, as we would a policy. It certainly is at a minimum to be comparable with establishing a policy. And so is that true? Do we have 30 days to make this assessment?
And we have gone to the 90 days, yes.
So we're late getting
90
this.
days, yes. Yes, ma'am.
So we're, no, I'm saying from the system. So we're late, the board is late getting this in terms of having an opportunity to deliberate.
We got it in May.
Right.
Yeah, and we started working on it.
Right. So that would be, I guess, the first point that I would make. So that may require us to, in order to meet our fiduciary responsibility, to at least table this for 30 days. It's where my motion may end up going. My second question, though, has to do with the point that Mr. Coleman raised, and that's our ability to negotiate the structure and content of the waivers, so that if a set of waivers come to us, in this case, population as an example, we're in a position to negotiate what the final waiver would be, the set of waivers would be. And I guess in relation to the contractual agreement that, and I can't think of the attorney's, Lawrence, do we need to know what the state's terms and conditions will be prior to us deciding what ours will be, so that we're not either having conflicts with what will be a second set of conditions placed on the contract, and how negotiable will our position be with that?
Lawrence, maybe you can clarify that, but to your question, Mr. Mayfield, it is my understanding, we voted on the amendment, a charter amendment, some time ago,
right,
regarding, that was related to going directly, petitioners going directly to the state,
right,
and bypassing DeKalb, or if they were, if they were denied by DeKalb, then they could go directly to the state, and the state could approve. Okay.
Right.
In this particular case, with a startup charter, all right, let's just say that we denied it for whatever reason, and make sure clear me if I'm incorrect, but if we denied it, they could go directly to the state, and the state could either overturn it or approve it or whatever in that regard. That is my understanding. Lawrence, do you have the same understanding?
Yeah, but just with a slight modification.
Yeah.
That in that situation, what happens is they go to the state, and then they become a state-sponsored charter school.
Right.
So it would be totally different than if
Right.
you approve, and then they would still be within district, control.
Right. And my question really had more to do with us having an agreement based on our approval with the petitioner, where some of the components of the terms and condition could be either overridden or come in conflict with the terms and conditions that we have with the state, and therefore make it almost a difficult contractual relationship with the petitioner.
I don't think the chance of a conflict is really there. I think what the issue is how much of the charter and the promises being made in the charter can we get into the contract itself that the state will allow, so that we have the enforceability of it.
Right, and so that's exactly where my concern would be, is that if we negotiate an element based on what the board approves that we want to have happen, but we can't get it into the state contract, it essentially nullifies that condition, which is a set of expectations that we would have. And so getting to my comment and then my probable motion is that I certainly think the board needs an appropriate amount of time to have this discussion and to work through particularly our major concerns, and at the very least to be able to place conditions within the contract that will allow some intermittent points for us to do a head check to see if this is something, if this 5-year agreement can be terminated if need be.
May I make a point of order? Because I'm looking at Dr. Thompson too. We'll be in violation of the law if we defer this. So
I think
we're past the deadline. The law establishes a 90-day timetable.
Not unless, if in fact the petitioners request an extension.
But we can't, on our motion, do that because we're in violation of the state law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if there are specific concerns, might I suggest that the members share them with Dr. Thompson and Ms. Copeland, and then we can re-engage the petitioners with those specific concerns. And with their consent, we could actually avoid any violation of the 90-day provision, but what we would need is the specific concerns or suggestions that we could share with the petitioners. What we want to do is to have a cooperative relationship with the petitioners. This will be, if it's approved, another school within DeKalb County. And that would be my suggestion. And obviously, I'm not asking you to do it now, but if there are specific concerns that a petitioner can address, then we should give them the opportunity to do so.
How many exact days do, excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just jump in. How many days do we actually have? Or are we over?
I think we're right.
So if they don't petition it today before we close this meeting,
Pat, exactly.
or I suppose we could move it to the business agenda to give ourselves some hours to make a decision.
Where are we with the petition, with the 90 days? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, so she said we're right at 80 business days.
So we've got 10 days.
Yeah, you know.
So we have time. Okay.
Okay.
As Chair, maybe would it be permissible with the entire board if we would each write down what your concerns are related to this petition and identify any changes you would like to see done. Meantime, when that is given to the superintendent will not only look at the legal component part of it, the petitioners should agree that this is something viable that they can agree to as well. And then when they bring the petition back to us, to the board for approval, it will be something that the superintendent can agree to, as well as the petitioners agreeing to. Is that something that's feasible? Okay. Yes, sir.
Which has to do about the waivers, and I think it's just important for us to keep mindset, which is we have an interesting intersection of where we stand, and I'm not disagreeing in terms of waivers and where the state is headed in terms of waivers, because the state is headed towards blanket waivers. They have made that quite clear. So which, to Thad's point about, we could get in a negotiation and the state could say, well, we don't care, we're going in this direction, and we should just be mindful that for conditions that, even if the petitioners agree, the state's philosophy, am I correct, has been to move towards the concept of blanket waivers for charters. We're still built on a paradigm of specific waivers, which I think there's a lot of merit in, but we want to just make sure that we don't come to Thad's point, to loggerheads with the state. What I was pointing out was that the state has moved towards a model of blanket waivers. We follow a model which I think has great value of specific waivers, and to your point, we don't want to come to loggerheads with the state where the state just says, well, it's too bad.
But
well, we will have no.
If the negotiation will be with the petitioners at this point and not with the state. And I would remind all of us, and I don't have to, the Georgia Department of Education is in a state of major flux right now, so it's hard to say where they are right now.
I would like to see us move, making sure that the Board of Education operate in a legal, legitimate way that's looking out for the benefit of the boys and girls of this great county. And we have no control over what the state does. We do our due diligence, and then when it gets to the state, then they have to do theirs. All in favor of the request I recently made regarding getting any changes you desire to the superintendent. The superintendent at that point would negotiate with the petitioners and then bring it back to the board at an appropriate time. That means that we may have to have a call meeting prior to that time.
I think we need confirmation on the timetable first, because I don't know that we're it'd be rare to hear it 80
10 days. I mean,
well, that was if it was 90 business days. I've rarely heard that things are measured in 90 business days as a lawyer. They're usually measured in 10 business days or 90 calendar days. If it's 90 calendar days, we're past the deadline.
I think that's right, and I'll have that determined very quickly.
You would let us know that before 5 o'clock.
Absolutely.
Today.
Yes.
Then we'll be able to make. Yes, sir, John.
I just have a very simple proposal. Yeah. This is not an official proposal in parliamentary procedure. I would just move this off the consent agenda to the business agenda. so that we have a few extra hours to consider, and then we can take it up again this evening, I think.
All in favor of doing that, just let me know by a show of hands. We're not voting, but, okay, well, this item will not be placed, we'll take it up again at the business meeting, yes.